Hello, hi, and welcome. If you're new here, my name is Sarah, and this is Wicked Reading, and today we're going to talk about the books that I read in the month of August. So actually, that's a little bit of a lie, because I have to start this video off by first talking about a book that I actually read in July, but I completely forgot to talk about in my July wrap-up. So we're going to talk about that book, then I'm going to go into my August stats, and then we'll go into August books. So let's just jump right in. So the book that I forgot to talk about in July that I read was A Dawn of Onyx by Kate Golden. This is the first book in, I believe, a trilogy called the Sacred Stones series. It might end up being more books, I don't know. But the world of this series kind of revolves around these territories named after different stones, as you can kind of surmise by the title and the name of the series. But we follow our main character, Arwen, and we open up the story with her interacting with her family. Her mother is very sick, and Arwen actually has this like rare magic, and she is also a healer. And I kind of forget a little bit because it's been a little while since I read this now, but her and her little family, meaning her sister, her brother, and her mom, pretty much have to run from their home because they're being chased by some soldiers from enemy territory. And the world is kind of at risk of war because there's this enemy army trying to overtake other territories. So her and her little family run away, and they end up getting separated, and she gets caught by Onyx soldiers from the Onyx territory. And the Onyx King is said to be one of the most ruthless, heartless beings ever. And so now she's like prisoner in Onyx and needs to figure out how to not be a prisoner of Onyx. That's kind of all I remember in terms of the setup. I did not read the synopsis before I read this book. I just went into it. I read it on Kindle Unlimited on my Kindle. So I really enjoyed the way that this story started off. To be honest, the bar was on the floor for a fantasy romance. The fantasy romance I read before this was When the Moon Hatched by Sarah Parker, and I hated that. So the bar was on the floor, and I really loved immediately how this book started. I felt like we really understood our character immediately. We understood her motivations. The stakes were pretty high. I really felt for the character, and I liked Arwen in general. And I really did enjoy the banter between her and the love interest. I really loved probably like the first 50% of this book. I was into it, really enjoyed it. And there is also like this side story of Arwen having like female friendship blossoming, and I love that. I love when stuff like that is added into a story, so I enjoyed that aspect as well. I don't really know what point of the book was a turning point, but I just found I started to care a little bit less after we kind of knew what the relationship was going to be and kind of where we were going. I kind of found myself caring a little bit less towards the end. I didn't dislike it, but I mean, as you can maybe tell as I'm trying to talk about this book now, a lot of it doesn't stand out to me other than the beginning and like the very ending. Otherwise, a lot of kind of like that middle aspect got away from me and has not really stuck too much, but I did enjoy it. But I just found myself not caring as much at the end. I do care enough to carry on and like read the sequel if I get my hands on it. I'm not going to go out of my way to get my hands on it because unfortunately, only the first one is on KU and the second one is not. So it's definitely not at the top of my to buy list or to get from the library list, but I will probably eventually read it. But yeah, I don't know. I don't have like too much to say about it. It exceeded my expectations at that point in time, but I have already since read better fantasy books than that. But I do think it was entertaining, liked the banter, liked a lot of the character interactions. The world was pretty interesting. I give it 3.5 stars. Good, entertaining while I read it. Not super long lasting, but not bad at all. Okay, so that was A Dawn of Onyx. So let's get into the stats for August. August was a better reading month for me, I guess, compared to July. I read more, but still no 5 stars, which sucks. I think I'm on, month 2 of no 5 stars. That being said, September is already looking way up. I think I might be reading a 5-star currently, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. Anyways, August. I ended up reading 13 books, which equated to 3,491 pages. My top mood was dark, followed by mysterious, tense, adventurous, and then some reflective, emotional, challenging, and funny in there as well. For page number, majority of the books that I read were actually smaller books under 300 pages, and that made up 54% of the books, while the remaining 56% were between 300 and 499 pages. My top genres were horror, followed by LGBTQIA+. It was a very gay month, high gay, and then followed by literary, thriller, fantasy, and so on and so forth. From there, it was definitely very kind of literary and horror focused. So coming into August, I did read a little bit more physically, a little less audiobook, but my audiobooks did still take the crown in being majority. And 54% of the books that I read were through audiobook, while 46% were print. I did not read anything on my Kindle in August, which is sad. That is the first month of the year that I did not read anything through my Kindle, specifically through KU. So I did fail at my 1 KU book a month in August. So there's that. So sad, but I am already currently reading a KU book now, so trying to make up for it. Oh, you know what? I said that I read 13 books. That's a little bit of a lie. So I read and completed 12 books, okay? So I did rate 12 of the books that I read. I actually DNFed 2 books. For whatever reason, Storygraph only counted 13. So I don't know. Side note, I was a little bit wrong with my 13 books, but I did rate all 12 books that I actually completed. My average rating was 3.58, not horrible, but like not the best, because like I said, we did not have any 5 stars. I had 1 2-star, 3 3-stars, 2 3.5 stars, 4 4 stars, and 2 4.5 stars. So I had 2 books that were pretty close, but still did not make the 5-star mark. So I'm going to switch it up a little bit this month. I typically go in order of the books that I read them, but I did a little poll on my Patreon, and my patrons decided that this month I am going to share the books in the order of which I rated them. So from lowest to highest, but in addition to that, these are actually also ranked. So I have like my 3 3-stars. The first 3-star I tell you is my lowest 3-star, and my third 3-star that I tell you about is my highest 3-star. So they're actually fully ranked as well. So let's first talk about my DNFs though. So like I said, I did DNF 2 books. The first book that I DNF'd, I started on audiobook. I got 16% of the way into it before I decided to DNF it. And that was Your Blood, My Bones by Kelly Andrew. I'm going to read the synopsis because I did not read the synopsis before I went into it. And obviously I did not finish it. And I was really confused what was going on anyway, so I could not give you a synopsis on my own if I tried. So it says, Wyatt Westlock has one plan for the farmhouse she just inherited, to burn it to the ground. But during her final walkthrough of her childhood home, she makes a shocking discovery in the basement. Peter, the boy she once considered her best friend, strung up in chains and left for dead. Unbeknownst to Wyatt, Peter has suffered hundreds of ritualistic deaths on her family's property. Semi-immortal, Peter never remains dead for long, but he can't really live either, not while he's bound to the farm, locked in a cycle of grisly deaths and painful rebirths. There's only one way for him to break free, and he needs to end the Westlock line. He needs to kill Wyatt. And there's a little bit more, but I'll leave it there. So I wasn't hating this, but I DNF'd it because I was so confused what was going on. It felt like I should have already known a lot about this world that I didn't know. There was like groups of people that were not explained, and I was just very much confused. But at the same time, the story was already so heavily based around other characters telling the main character what was going on, which I don't like. I do not like a passive main character who is just being told information or is just watching things happen. I don't like a passive main character, and that's what a lot of this felt like. It felt like just full blast exposition, and despite that, I was still confused. I have since seen somebody talk about this book in which they mentioned that somebody else told them that they should read The Whispering Dark by this author before getting into Your Blood, My Bones, because it would make more sense. So I think that that might be the issue, because the books aren't necessarily like sequels of each other or whatever, but they fall under the same umbrella in the same universe apparently. So I guess if you read The Whispering Dark first, you'll kind of maybe understand what you're getting thrown into in this book. But yeah, I don't care. I don't care enough to like seek it out and like read the other book and then get back into this. At this point, I'm just giving up on it, but it wasn't necessarily bad. I didn't like the approach of the story and I was confused and not at all invested. So I just kind of gave it up. That's that one. Not like a very resentful or like spiteful type of DNF, but just wasn't working for me. Now this next DNF is a very spiteful, very anger-driven DNF because I hated this book so much. This book is so bad. The next book that I DNF'd was The Deer and the Dragon by Piper C.J. I did have a physical copy of it. I do not have it anymore because that is how much I despised this book, but I did know a lovely person who did really love the story, so I actually sent it to her. She's one of my patrons. She loved it so much, I wanted her to be able to have a physical copy of it, but I really did not like this story. I DNF'd it because I just could not do another second of the story. It was so poorly written, just so repetitive, so much nothing happened. So much nothing happened, like nothing. And the character, again, was super passive. It was just a lot of secondary characters telling her things. There were a lot of plot holes that were just so blaring to me. I did not like the writing. I already said that, but I did not like the writing. So I do have a spoiler-filled reading vlog of me reading this up to my DNF point, of me fully dragging this book, reading lines that I just felt to be horribly written, pointing out everything that didn't make sense, everything that was making me mad. So it pretty much ended up being a rant review. So I do have a spoiler-filled reading vlog of that if you're interested, but it is a Patreon exclusive for my bug tier and up. If you are interested in me fully dragging this book and giving very many details on everything I hated about this book, you could check that out. But I'm honestly gonna leave my rant here because just like, don't even get me started again, okay? This book was not good. Not good. I'm not gonna rate it. I did get up to, I wanna say 54% of the book. I know I made it to halfway at least, but just know, if I finished this book, I can almost guarantee you this would have been a 1 star. Truly, sincerely, worst book I've read so far this year, okay? So moving on. So moving on to the books that I actually did finish, and the first one I actually do still have, but I will not have. I will be putting it up on my Pango. Sidebar, I will be updating my Pango shop very soon. I have like 30 books or something that I have to list on my Pango, which is always linked in the description if you're on the market for some other books. But that being said, Jaws by Peter Benchley. Whew. So I actually ended up listening to the audiobook for this. This was one of my bookmark picks for the month of August for my blind bookmark TBR pulls. I'm glad that I have this marked off. I'm glad it's done and I can get rid of it. This book was not good either. Stick to the movie. The movie's fantastic, at least from what I remember. I haven't watched the movie in like probably a decade, to be honest, but the movie is way better. This book was so incredibly boring. Before I get too ranty, I will give it its flowers and say that the opening shark attack scene, very well done. Very well done. The first scene of this book, good. I was actually a little bit, like, it was effective for me. I was actually kind of freaking out a little bit because I was thinking about how I would react in a situation of being attacked by a shark. I actually feel like the shark attack, the first one, was much more effective in written form because I was just able to put myself in the situation of being attacked myself, of like feeling my leg and I'm touching bone all of a sudden, you know, that kind of situation. But the whole rest of the book, so boring. So boring. This is so much more of a domestic drama, city drama. It was so boring with the most mundane things. It's much more of like almost a character study, but almost like a town study, like a group of character study, because it's not really only focused on one particular person. We bop around town quite a bit. I do have me ranting about this in another vlog if you want to check that out. I will have that linked. I rant a little bit more there. I read lines straight up from the worst scene of this book, that not even just of this book, the worst scene of a book I have ever read ever, the worst flirting scene in a book ever written in all of human history, probably. The worst flirting scene, disgusting, did not need to be included. I don't understand why it was in there. And then they don't even really look for the fish, the shark, until maybe the last 30 pages or 50 pages or something. I don't know. I was so uninvested at that point. It's just a lot of talking about the shark. And I thought it would be a lot more of a scientific approach to sharks in general, but no, it was actually extremely ignorant. I don't think it's worth the time of reading it if you've seen the movie. I truly don't. I feel bad because I'm usually not so harsh. I've never really said that a book is not worth it. I'm always like, there's somebody that this is for. I don't know who this is for. A 50-year-old man. I think that that's the only person that this is for, because yeah, it just was not it. It was not good. I'm sorry. But if you liked it, I'm happy for you. Anyways, Jaws by Peter Benchley. Watch the movie. Don't read the book. Then, next on my rating list is My Husband. Ooh, I don't know who this is about. Maud, I want to say. Maud Ventura? Yeah, Maud Ventura. So this is actually a translated work. I believe it was originally written in French. So this story is about a woman who is just really obsessed with her husband. And I truly feel like that is all you need to know going into the story, because it is very much just stream of consciousness of this woman being obsessed with her husband. There's not a plot. It's just that, which, you know, had some interesting moments. I will give it that. There was like a moment where I don't even remember what the situation was, but the husband was like asked to compare his wife to like a fruit. If she were a fruit, what kind of fruit she would be. And he had said she was an orange. And the main character took absolute offense to that and went pretty much in a spiral about why she would ever be an orange. So there was like some interesting stuff and like very off the wall things, but my biggest issue with this book is it is like so stream of consciousness, in the sense that we are stuck in this woman's mind and we have no idea what's really going on around her. I enjoy a stream of consciousness that still feels connected to an outside world, where we are getting the inner thoughts of a character interacting with their environment, versus this story, she was not interacting with very much. So we are strictly stuck in her head and in her obsessive thoughts, and we're just not really getting anything else. So there just like wasn't really much for me to be interested in. So it was, at the end of the day, quite forgettable. Literally the orange scene is all I remember from it. I don't really remember anything else except the epilogue, which I hated. I did not like the way that it ended. It kind of made everything that had happened mean nothing, essentially. So yeah, I don't have much more to say about it because, like I said, it's a little bit forgettable. So I gave it 3 stars, but it is my lowest 3 stars for a reason. Moving right along to Paradise Rot by Jenny Voll. I don't know how to say her name because I know it's like Norwegian, so I'm sure it's pronounced different. So this is quite a subversive, is that the word I want? A subversive type of story where we follow our main character, Jo, and she goes away to uni as a foreign exchange student. And she starts to have some strange interactions with her roommate. And it pretty much sells itself as everything that Jo believes to be reality becomes to get blurred, where bodies turn to plants, and it's just very hallucinatory in that way. So I was like really excited for this. If like hallucinatory or like planty stuff is mentioned for a book, I'm immediately picking it up. So I was really excited for this, but this one was just a little bit too out there for me. It's definitely very weird and very, very, very literary. I feel like a lot of the stuff, it was interesting because I feel like a lot of the stuff went over my head, but certain things were almost too dead on. Like the whole reason it's called Paradise Rot, and there's a lot of analogies and symbolism with Adam and Eve and stuff like that, and that was extremely obvious. But then there was a lot of stuff that I still don't know that I understood. So I actually read this for my bunny book club for my top tier on Patreon. And I feel like we all ended up having very similar feelings where a lot of the writing was very pretty. And when I would read certain lines out loud, I really liked that and the writing. But overall, there just wasn't enough grounding in the story to feel invested in the story. It's not a long book. I think it's like 150 pages, and it took me like 5 days to finish because it just felt like a chore. But the writing was very lovely. There was a lot of moments that I liked of the writing itself. This book is very much for the writing. So in that way, it's very atmospheric, and you can only buy into the story if you're being pulled into the atmosphere that it is trying to create. And I could not get pulled into that atmosphere. So I was kind of teetering on giving it a 2.5 star. That's kind of my gut reaction. But then when we were kind of discussing it for Bunny Book Club, I was reiterating some of the lines and I was like, well, these were really well written. If I pull out certain text and certain paragraphs, I really enjoyed those on their own, isolated from the rest of the story. So I ended up giving it 3 stars because I do think that the writing was very unique and kind of gives it a little bit of an edge. So I did give it 3 stars. I did up it from my initial 2.5, but that is Paradise Rot. My final 3 star was Dark Harvest by Norman Partridge. This was another one that I listened to on audiobook, and overall it was fine. It was fine and I liked it. But in the story, we follow this town that every Halloween there is what is called the October Boy, and it is this jack-o'-lantern scarecrow person that is released onto this town, and all of the boys in the town pretty much have to hunt the October Boy down, and whoever catches the October Boy wins. And I guess like that's probably all I should say about it. I actually talk about this in my vlog that will be coming out next week, so maybe I should probably keep my thoughts a little bit limited here. But it's interesting because it very much felt like being told a story, which I know almost makes no sense. But I feel like a lot of times, like a book, I am kind of subconsciously inserting myself into the story. I'm picturing versions of me in the stories. This was very much felt like being told like a bedtime story, or like, I don't know, like a mythical story, like being told a story, because you're not really living through characters either. But the formatting of the story was interesting, and there were moments where I would flip to second person, where it would be like, you know what I'm talking about because you've lived in this town and you've hunted for the October Boy, whatever. All of a sudden it would like pull you into the story, quite literally. So it was interesting how once in a while I would kind of flip into the second person. But I did find myself getting quite annoyed a little bit in the beginning, and also confused, because there were moments where the story is literally saying, but you know what I mean, like I don't have to explain it to you. Like, you know the story, I don't need to explain it to you. And I'm like, yes you do. Yes you do, don't gaslight me. I do not know what you're talking about. So I was also annoyed at moments of that too, but I also thought it was interesting. So I have like conflicting thoughts with that. But mostly overall, I just didn't super connect with the story. Despite how short it is, I still felt like it was too long. It felt quite a bit repetitive, but also it was interesting. It was unique, and I liked how we were slowly getting reveals of stuff, and we kind of slowly started to understand what was really going on with this day. Yeah, so I don't know. I have like kind of conflicting thoughts with this one, where I liked it, but there were definitely some things that I was getting annoyed at and some things I didn't quite like. It was fine. I think it's a good seasonal read, but I don't think I would like it in any other time or place. I think I would only ever like it in a season. So it really kind of lowers its ranking for me compared to a lot of other books. So yeah, I gave it 3 stars. I don't know. It was my highest 3-star though. After that, we get into my 3.5 stars, and the first 3.5 star I have is Please Stop Trying to Leave Me by Alana Saab. This is a recently released lit fic book. The cover is stunning. I do love the cover. This book I talk about in my reading library books. So if you want to check that out, I talk about this book more there. So I'll keep it brief here. So in the story, we pretty much follow our main character. We are in her mind, in her POV, where she gets a new therapist and she starts new therapy sessions, and her new therapist pretty much says and diagnoses her with derealization and depersonalization disorder. And that is pretty much the setup of the story. Is pretty much just following her in her therapy sessions. But also, this book is very unique in that the main character is an author. So we'll have a chapter of her dialogue between her and her therapist, and then the next chapter will be a manuscript that she wrote. And the manuscripts tend to kind of give us a glimpse, potentially, into the main character's growing up, her parents, kind of her relationship with her girlfriend. So we get peeks into her life through these stories that she's written. So it gets a little bit meta, because then she also kind of talks about how she's writing this book and how experimental of a book this is. So it gets quite a bit meta in that way. And I do feel like this book was very experimental with that choice and with the formatting. And yeah, I really, really liked it in the beginning. I was like loving it in the beginning, where she's talking about depersonalization and derealization, and the characters kind of describing what that feels like. And I was eating it up. But as the story went on, it just was getting away from me in terms of I just found myself not caring as much. It just did turn very much into the character's backstory and her parents going through divorce and stuff like that. And I just did not find myself connecting as much to the story. So it was just kind of losing me a bit by the end. But I do think that the writing was good. There were some moments, almost forgot, there were some moments that very much aged this book and plopped it right down into a 2024 book. So that is very cringy for me to read. If you're referencing who the president is, if you are talking about very today issues and today references, that will take me out of a book so fast. I don't want to read a book that's referencing President Biden. Even if what they're saying I agree with, that's not why I'm reading fiction, you know? So I didn't love that it very much aged itself for today's world. So that made it cringy a little bit. And yeah, I don't know. It just really kind of fell off for me by the end. So yeah, but because the writing was unique and the formatting was unique and how much I loved it in the beginning, I did give it 3.5 stars. Another 3.5 stars that I listened to on audiobook was Smothermoss by Eliza Alering. And you know, it's a very interesting story. We follow two sisters, and the synopsis, I don't know that it really, like, it's true. The synopsis is true, but I don't feel like it really gives the true vibe of what this book is. The synopsis talks about that we follow two sisters, and there's a stranger that comes to town, and women start to go missing, and the mountain is not happy or something like that. I don't remember. So we do follow two sisters, and there is a man that ends up making some women go missing, but this is much more about the mountain, about living in the Appalachian Mountains, about living poor in the Appalachian Mountains, and with these two sisters and kind of what they're going through. Mostly the older sister. We follow the older sister. And it takes a very surreal, magical realism type of approach, where the mountain pretty much has like an aura of its own, we'll say. So while there is kind of that plot that the synopsis touches on, it is very much veiled in a lot more surrealistic and magical realism type of elements. The beginning, I was getting a little bit confused on what was actually happening and what wasn't happening. And then I was kind of getting confused on who I was following some of the times. So, you know, it's a tougher read, I think, to kind of stay on top and stay where the book wants you to be. I, again, have that fine line where if it's not rooted enough, it starts to drift away from me. And there were definitely certain moments of this book that I feel like drifted away from me, but I did really like the writing. I found the writing to be extremely unique, and specifically the descriptions of the mountain, the descriptions of the just like plant life and nature in general. I think that those were absolutely stunning descriptions, but there were definitely a lot of elements that I feel like weren't fully fleshed out and just kind of came and went, and we didn't really circle back to. So I do feel like a lot of things in this book felt very underdeveloped, and I wish we explored a lot more, a lot deeper. So yeah, I really appreciate the idea of the story and what it kind of started to do, and I just wish it went further with it. And this is a book I wish it were longer because I wanted to understand a little bit more about it. So yeah, I gave it 3.5. I do think it was stunningly written, but I just wanted more from it. Okay, we have 6 books left. I feel like I'm talking at a snail's pace, so I'm gonna try to go through these a little bit faster. So, getting into our 4 stars, the first 4-star that I read was Maggots Screaming by Max Booth III. Now, I will say this is very much my lowest 4-star because I was kind of teetering on a 3.5 star for this one. But in the story, we follow a young boy. I don't remember his name, but he's like 12. Let me look up his name really quick. I feel like I never know a character's name, so I'm gonna try to be better about that. Okay, so the synopsis doesn't even say his name. It literally just says, on a hot summer weekend in San Antonio, Texas, a father and son bond after discovering 3 impossible corpses buried in their backyard. So I'll leave it there. So we're following the young boy through this story, and it's very much a kind of zany story. It's very silly, goofy, and you know, I had a lot of fun with it. I don't think I would have liked it as much if I did not listen to the audiobook. I think that the audiobook narrator made it much more of a fun experience. I think that if I was reading it physically, I would just kind of get annoyed of it, and I don't know if I'd make it through, just because of the tone of the story is not a tone I typically read. I don't read very many zany, goofy stories. So I did really like how unique it was. Once I figured out what was going on, I thought that it was just really cool. And I loved the take that the story was taking. The take that the story was taking. Yeah. Really great at analyzing and talking. But yeah, that's true. I enjoyed the way that the story went. The approach of it, just very, very unique. But I will say there were certain aspects to the story that I didn't love, and that actually annoyed me. The Simpsons gets brought up a lot. And again, we're following the POV of like a 12-year-old boy. So I understand why so many Simpsons references were made. There's a moment that he like talks and describes a video game in order to connect it to like what he's experiencing, and it makes sense with the character. So I totally understand why it's there, but at the same time, I don't want to read that for so long, or I guess listen to that for so long. There's a lot of description of decay in this book, and I will say it was very accurate. I have been trained and have performed autopsies, also including decayed bodies. So it was very accurate. So I do feel like Max Booth III did their research when writing this story, so I respect that. So I did like that, but I did have a good time, but there was definitely some stuff holding me back from fully loving the story, and it's just a very different tone of story than I typically read. So yeah, I was kind of leaning on a 3.5, but I ended up giving it a 4 because I feel like for the type of story it was, I should not compare that to like my all-time favorite literary horrors. So I did kind of give it a 4 more so because of the story type that it is. You know, I just noticed my lights behind me had turned off. I don't know when they turned off, but I just turned them back on. Anyway, so moving right along, my next 4-star was Patricia Wants to Cuddle by Samantha Allen. So this is another one I listened to on audiobook, and I do recommend the audiobook. I think that the audiobook made it a better experience for me. So actually, speaking of zany books, this was also a little bit more of a zany story. It was definitely more in the humor territory, which I actually enjoyed. I feel like it played well into the story. So we are following this group of reality star contestants, and it's very much emulating a show kind of like The Bachelor. So we're following I want to say that there were like 5 contestants that were left or something like that. And for the semi-finalists or whatever, the producers are taking the contestants to this island. And if you make, the final, you get to stay on this island and whatever. So they're going on this island that doesn't get very many tourists, and they very quickly realize why. I think it was fun. The characters are annoying, but I felt like they were supposed to be annoying. They were very much like the typical religious preacher's girl contestant. And then the blonde, big-boobed, bonehead contestant, and then the token black contestant, and then I forget what the other one was, the like sassy whatever contestant. So I feel like the girls were very purposefully very much characterized and typecasted into their characters. So the characters were annoying, but in a way that I felt like was fun and funny. But I did really like just where the story went. It gets pretty brutal, like pretty gruesome, which I was surprised by, but I did enjoy that aspect to it. The turn that it takes, it makes sense now, but at first I had no idea where the story was gonna go. But I liked the turn that it took and the metaphor it was going for, and all of that, because the author is a transgender woman, and that kind of plays into the story. And I liked the metaphor and the symbolism that it was doing. I thought it was really interesting, and it was a fun time. I laughed a lot, so it was very entertaining. I was very entertained by the story, so I gave it 4 stars. The next 4-star I have is Cicada Summer by Erica McKean. This did take me a while to read, and not because I wasn't enjoying it, but Erica McKean, her writing is very dense and very lyrical, very metaphorical, very flowery, very purple prose. So I kind of really take my time with her stories in general and her writing in general. And it's one of those, I need to annotate, I need to soak it all in, I need to reread lines, that kind of approach to a story. But this one even more so because of the structure of the story. So in this book, we are following our main character, Husha, and she is dealing with the fact that her mother actually took her own life, and she is now taking care of her grandfather, where he is very much older. His wife has since passed, and he needs help around the house to cook and take care of things. So he needs a care provider, and Husha provides that. And she also has this girlfriend that comes to visit them as well. So the story revolves around Husha finding one of her mother's journals. But it's not a journal like a Dear Diary type of journal where her mother's talking about herself and her life, but instead she finds this journal where her mother wrote seemingly a collection of short stories. So the book pretty much becomes Husha, her grandfather, and her girlfriend reading the short stories. And the short stories are in this book. So it's kind of like a book in a book. And I really enjoyed a lot of it. Now, because it kind of has the like short story, the multiple story along with it, there were definitely moments and stories that I connected to a lot more than others. So I did give it 4 stars, but some of the stories were so stunning. The very first one made me tear up. Made me tear up. It's called The Surfacing, and I don't know, just the way Erica McKean just so seamlessly combines literary, beautiful writing with very intense and descriptive body horror. Like Tear by Erica McKean, that's one of my favorite books of the year so far. That leans a lot more into horror than this one. This one is much more literary, but there's still moments that you're like, oh my God. One of the stories was just so sad too. I do feel like a lot of the stories have things that involve kids, so if you have trigger warnings with that, beware of that. But I felt very moved by a lot of the stories. Also, I feel like a lot of the stories and the book in general very much kind of has these overarching themes around losing a loved one, the grieving process of losing a loved one. There's a lot of grief in the story. Beginning of life, end of life, middle of life. It just really touches on so many different human experiences, and Erica McKean just has something special. Just this book is very much difficult to describe because it is so unique. Her writing is so unique. This was a recent release. I think she released it in June of 2024, so a few months ago. I hope she's working on another book. Anything she puts out, I will immediately buy. But at the same time, this one is hard to recommend because I do feel like it's just not going to be for everybody because, again, it's very literary, very unique, not super easy to read. And you kind of have to work for her stories. You kind of have to get what you need out of them. They're not super plot heavy. It very much relies on connecting to a story and having some sort of visceral emotional response to that. So I really enjoyed it. My next 4-star and my favorite 4-star was Foul Days by Genoveva Tomova. So this, again, I did also read in my library reads vlog, so I'll keep this brief. But this is a story where we follow our main character, Kasara, and she is a witch. And she makes a deal with a stranger because she has to get out of a situation fast. So the stranger says, if you give me your shadow, which is the source of witches' powers in this world, if you give me your shadow, I will transport you to the next city. And this next city is actually blocked off by a wall because in the city that Kasara lives, there is this, I think it's 12 days long. There's this 12-day long Foul Days in which the veil is so thin that a lot of monsters descend on their city, on Chernigrad. So the book opens up with Foul Days starting. Kasara needs to get out of a situation. The stranger says, hey, give me your shadow and I'll blip you into the next city. And she does that. And then she's in this new city, which is like much higher wealth and fancier. And so she's in this nice city, but she doesn't have her shadow, so she doesn't have her magic anymore. And she kind of realizes, oh shit, I need my shadows back. So she ends up joining forces with this detective that investigates magical crime, I guess. And she joins forces with him reluctantly in order to get back to Chernigrad to find her shadow and blah, blah, blah. So I had so much fun with the story, like a lot of fun. It's very plot driven, so it was a good time. I really enjoyed the world. I really enjoyed the monsters. I felt like it was just a really fun fantasy time. It was much more, I almost want to call it cozier. I mean, it's not cozy in the sense you're just kind of like laying around chilling, but it's cozy where while there are kind of high stakes going on, there's a sense of humor to it. There's a sense of lightheartedness to it. There's this maybe side plot of a romance, like potentially in future books that might happen, that was cute. So it was just a very down to earth, I guess, kind of fantasy that I had fun time with. I will say the themes were a bit heavy-handed, but also I did like the themes, but yeah, they were a little bit heavy-handed, a little bit on the nose. There's a lot of themes surrounding classism, xenophobia, domestic partner abuse, both emotionally, and I believe there was like physical implied, but not on page. But there's some themes surrounding that you don't really get to for a while in the story, but they are there. And again, it was a little bit of a heavy-handed metaphor and symbolism for those aspects. But I overall just had a really good time with this. I feel like this month of reading, I read a lot more books that were just a good time and zany and fun than I typically do. So I'm kind of surprised that one of my top moods was still dark. I mean, I definitely still read a lot of dark things. I mean, even this had like dark aspects to it. So it still makes sense. But I just feel like I read a lot more books that I was having fun with in August. And this was one of them. So enjoyed this. Do recommend it. So getting into my 4.5 stars, my first one is A Botanical Daughter by Noah Medlock. I read this physically and I really, really enjoyed this. So this is kind of like a Frankenstein inspired story where we follow two men who are partners, secret partners, during 1800 something, I don't know. And they are very interesting, quirky little individuals. The one guy is part of the Horticultural Society and he's super into plants, and the other guy is a taxidermist. So Gregor ends up getting a fungus, a mycelium, and the mycelium is very different, very unique, and seems to have a little bit of a mind of its own, and it kind of reacts to the environment much more differently than normal plants do. And pretty much his goal is to create true intelligent life from plant matter, and they end up making pretty much a daughter. I really enjoyed the characterizations of the characters. I felt like they were very deep, very complex. They both had flaws, which I really enjoyed. I like Simon. He's very socially awkward, which I love to read because same. So I really enjoyed Simon. Gregor is like a hothead and he gets under your skin and then you forgive him and then he gets under your skin again. So I did really enjoy the characterizations. There is also a side character. I forget her name. She's kind of helping them around the house because her father can't take care of her or whatever, and she needs a job. So she's around too. I forget her name, but I really like her. The story is very atmospheric. It is quite, I guess, slower because it's more historical. You're very much getting very ingrained with the characters, and the writing is very historically accurate, I guess. So it's historical feeling in that way. So it's very kind of slow, atmospheric, but I really enjoy that. There were some moments where I felt like the characters had very isolated moments of doing something uncharacteristic. One thing that I did notice that kind of got annoying at certain points was Simon and Gregor would almost always be on the opposite thought process when it came to the botanical daughter. One would think one thing and one would think the opposite, and then a few chapters later they would switch those thoughts. And now Gregor's fully on board with something and Simon's apprehensive. So I did notice that more than once. So if it only happened one or two times, yeah, you can always like change your mind. But it happened a little bit too often, so that kind of took me out of the moment for a second. It was very passing, but I did notice that. And the ending does get a little bit weird, but I actually liked it. But I can definitely see some people not liking the ending because there's a moment that's a little bit weird at first, but the more I thought about it, the more I appreciate what I think it was kind of going for, at least what I got out of it. But yeah, I don't know. I don't have much more to say about this. Historical, atmospheric, planty. It does get brutal in a couple of moments. They're not like super long or anything, but it got a little bit more brutal than I expected at certain parts, but there's that. And then our final book, and that was Eynhallow by Tim McGregor. So this is another Frankenstein inspired story, but this one's a little bit different because this one actually inserts Victor Frankenstein into the story. So it's kind of more of like a reimagining where it takes a certain period of Victor Frankenstein's life and kind of a blind spot of his typical Mary Shelley timeline and kind of inserts this kind of side story into it, if that makes sense, if I explain that well. And I enjoyed this. So in the story, we follow our main character, Agnes, and she is a woman who lives on this island, and there's very few people that live on this island. I think there's like max 20 people, and she lives there with her husband who has always lived on this island, and he is quite older than her, and they have 4 kids, and she's a little bit I don't know. She's just kind of having a moment where she's thinking about her life and thinking about what else her life could have been when a stranger shows up on this island, and they don't get visitors. So it's all the talk of the island, and he ends up living in this abandoned house on this island, and he is working on experiments. So Agnes ends up forming a relationship with this man after her husband volunteers her to kind of be his housekeeper, but they kind of end up forming a little bit of a friendship through this interaction, and the story kind of takes off from there. There is a side plot with our main character Agnes and a friendship she has with, I want to say her name was Kate or Katie. She has a relationship, like a friendship with another woman on the island, and I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the atmosphere of the story. Again, this one is very much historically driven, so the text and the writing was very historical sounding, and it delves into misogyny, and I liked Agnes as a character a lot. I, again, found her to be very funny too. She's very quick-witted. I feel like it was a very good adage to the Victor Frankenstein lore. I personally did not love Frankenstein. I feel like Victor Frankenstein is the twerpiest twerp of a person to ever exist. I did not enjoy him at all in Frankenstein or his story. Like, anytime he talked, I was like, shut up. But I found that this book made me like him a little bit more, but at the same time, it did really capture his twerpiness. So I don't know, I feel like the author, Tim McGregor, did a really great job at still capturing the original voice of Victor Frankenstein while spinning something new out of it and having new added characters to his destructive tendencies. This book gets very bleak at the end. It is a very bleak ending, and I do think I could have done without maybe 20 to 30 pages of the ending. I felt like it just kind of kept going a little bit more than I needed it to, but at the same time, I wasn't mad about it while I was reading it. I mean, I was mad for the reasons that you were supposed to be mad, but I wasn't like, okay, you know, cut, we're done. It could have been tied up a little bit sooner, even though this is a pretty short book. Yeah, you just kind of really feel the isolation and anger by the end. So I guess in that way, it probably accomplished exactly what it wanted to do. I enjoyed it, had a good time, as much of a good time as you can have with that. I will say that there is quite graphic situations with childbirth and maybe that childbirth not leading to a healthy baby. So keep that in mind because it gets very graphic in that moment. Even I was like, oh wow, I don't know that I'm prepared to deal with childbirth. So it gets very graphic. So if that is a trigger for you, please be aware of that. But otherwise, I enjoyed the story, and yeah. So that was my favorite book of the month, and that was all of the books that I read and DNF'd in August, and a book that I read in July that I forgot to talk about. So if you've read any of those books, let me know what you thought of them. If you made it to this point in the video and have nothing else to say, but want to let me know that you were here, go ahead and leave me like a leaf emoji in the comments down below. As always, thank you so much for spending some of your time with me while I sit down and talk about books. If you haven't yet, please give the video a like, subscribe for future content, turn on the bell notification, all the fun YouTube things that help your girl out, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye!